Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight, what low turnout for COVID booster shots could mean for case counts this winter. We're one-on-one with Chicago's top doctor.
We are better positioned, I am certain, than any other big city in the country.
Mayor Lightfoot's promises to use federal COVID relief funds to transform Chicago are falling short, says city data.
There's a lot of things that we want to do, there are plans to do that we really wouldn't be able to do without additional resources.
Why the Cook County Forest Preserve District is asking voters for a small tax hike.
My name is Reuben Jonathan Miller. I'm a sociologist, a criminologist, and a social worker.
And now Reuben Jonathan Miller can add genius to his resume. The sociologist is one of the MacArthur Genius Grant recipients. We'll hear about his work and his next project.
October marks Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We talk mammogram misconceptions and early detection in the Black community.
The latest from the Goodman Theater, the Joffrey Ballet, and more when arts critic Hedy Weiss returns to our studio.
You come here for a scare, you're going to get a scare.
Prepare for that scare. We take you on a terrifying tour of one of Chicago's longest-running haunted houses.
But first, some of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot defends the decision by Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown not to fire an officer who lied about his ties to the far-right Proud Boys extremist group.
I think it's about accountability, and I think the police department took the steps that the evidence that was gathered through the course of the two investigations warranted.
The officer was suspended for 120 days and was not identified in a report released Friday by Inspector General Deborah Witzberg. A probe conducted by the Chicago Police Department documented the officer's ties to the Proud Boys, labeled by the FBI as an anti-Semitic white supremacy organization. You can read more about this on our website.
Key city roads and alleys are primed for a facelift as Mayor Lightfoot unveils a new infrastructure proposal. Highlights include over $250 million repairing streets and alleys, nearly $200 million to public facility renovations, over $150 million addressing the city's aging fleet, and just over $114 million for bridges and viaducts. The plan is an update to Lightfoot's Chicago Works 5-year plan that she originally announced in April of 2021.
A Cook County-run hospital in Bronzeville will start ambulance service again after more than a decade-long hiatus.
We are trying to serve our community better by bringing them services so they can stay in the community, get the care that they need in the community, in the time that they need in the community, so we can have a positive impact on the lives of the people that we serve.
Provident Hospital of Cook County suspended ambulance service in 2011 to reduce costs. Cook County Health CEO Israel Rocha says they're working on creating a sustainable model for the hospital. He says he hopes the hospital will be financially sustainable this year for the first time in a long time. Other recent improvements to the hospital include a new MRI machine and inpatient dialysis service.
And coming up in the program, voters are set to weigh in on a potential tax hike, why the Cook County Forest Preserve say they need the revenue.
But up next, a one-on-one with the city's top doctor on the latest COVID boosters, monkeypox, and more. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Chicago and Cook County both remain in a low community level for the spread of COVID-19, meaning the risk of contracting the virus is low. But public health officials say what's also low is uptake of the new bivalent booster formulated to counter the Omicron subvariants of the virus. Joining us with the latest on the virus is Chicago Department of Public Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Last time we had you in studio was March of 2020, I think, and we all know what happened after that. It's good to have you. So, according to your office, Chicago and Cook County remain in the low community level, as we said, with 94 new cases in Chicago over 7 days as of late last week. Of course, the goal is to be below 200 To what do you attribute this low level?
So we're seeing a low level in terms of the official cases being reported, because those are really people who are getting diagnosed in healthcare settings or in pharmacies. We know there are many, many more people than that who are home testing, and that's great. We're most concerned about what's happening with hospitalizations. We have more than 20 Chicagoans every single day still getting hospitalized newly for COVID-19, and we are unfortunately starting to see that number tick up just a bit. So we're at a low level. We're happy about that, but it's a combination of just COVID has been relatively quiet through the summer, but now that we're heading into colder weather, we're watching it closely.
Well, and to that point, are you concerned about a new variant or new sub-variant as we head into these colder months and the holidays when people are getting together?
Right. So we continue to see COVID mutate, right? Like, we're tired of COVID, but COVID is not tired of us. And so we have been seeing some newer sub-variants of Omicron, especially in these last couple of weeks. But the good news is it's all still been Omicron. And so getting this fall 2022 booster, which is specifically targeted for Omicron, is critical heading into the winter. My biggest worry would be if we saw not just another sub-variant of Omicron, but if we saw, remember in the first few years, we'd see Alpha and Delta. We haven't seen a new one emerge like that in almost a year, but it was in November, December, a year ago, that we saw Omicron first emerge, and it really was a big problem for us.
So your office says uptake of this most recent booster has been slow and uneven across the demographic groups. For example, only 18.7% of eligible white residents in Chicago have gotten the vaccine, 11.8% of eligible Asian residents, nearly 8% of black residents, and 5.6% of eligible Latino residents have received this booster. And of course, your office is encouraging people to get the booster. Why do you think folks have been slow to get this shot?
So I think a lot of people, because we're at a low point from COVID, they're not thinking about it. They're not that worried about it. They say, I had a COVID vaccine in the past. This seems like something we don't need to worry about so much. But the problem is that even if we're tired of thinking about COVID, we are absolutely anticipating some kind of a COVID season this winter. In the same way, every year we have a flu season. The question is, how bad is that season going to be? And we make a new flu vaccine every year to match the strains, the variants of flu. This is really how we're thinking of COVID now. So we are almost certainly going to see some surge with cold weather, but being able to get this updated vaccine, I want people to hear that it's different. It's different than the booster you got in the past. It's different than the vaccine you got at the beginning. And we know that people just this year in Chicago, 6 times more likely to die if they are not vaccinated versus boosted. So it's not just, I'm glad you got the vaccine in the past if you did, but it's really important more than ever this fall to get that updated COVID vaccine.
What more can the city do to reach some of those demographics that we know have been disproportionately impacted?
Yeah, so we continue to operate our at-home program. People can call 312-746-4835, and we will bring you vaccine all over the city. We'll bring it to your home. We'll bring boosters for everybody, your neighbors, everybody from the age of 5 up should get this booster. So that's one of the easiest ways, because no matter what your issue is, we come on weekends, we come on mornings, we come in evenings. We also are standing up a lot of clinics, not just our larger clinics, which happen every weekend, but we're working with churches, we're working with aldermanic offices, we're working with senior centers, and really having a lot of events. You can go to chi.gov/vaxcalendar if you want to see what's near you. But more importantly, you can get the COVID vaccine and the flu vaccine. They are both free. I gave the mayor one in each arm, and that is really what I recommend for Chicagoans.
What are you hearing as far as some of the misconceptions or misunderstandings or the resistance? What are people telling your office?
Yeah, I think we're hearing mostly that I had my vaccines already. That's the biggest one. There's a lot of people who I think have not quite understood that this fall one is different. It's been tweaked to better fight off, the spikes of the Omicron variant. And so, I see patients in clinic, and a lot of them I say, are you up to date with your vaccines? They say yes. And I say, when was the last vaccine? And they say April. And they're willing to get it, but it's just not top of mind. And I don't want COVID to be top of mind for anybody. Getting the vaccine now helps us keep it at this low level.
Yesterday, the governor lowered some of the testing and vaccine mandates for healthcare workers and the mask requirement in healthcare settings, saying COVID-19 is on its way to being endemic like the flu. What's your reaction to those changes?
Yeah, so the specifics of the change in the emergency order were that the governor basically said you should follow, healthcare facilities should follow the CDC on this. So right now, our healthcare facilities are at a substantial level of COVID, which is 1 below high. So if we were to go back to high, then the recommendation for masking would go back in. I can tell you that hospitals here in Chicago are not taking the masks off. We're heading right now into respiratory season. Our pediatric hospitals are already almost full with non-COVID and flu, and COVID and flu haven't even started. So, I anticipate for sure that people will continue wearing masks. That's where vulnerable people are. We've got folks in those hospitals getting treated for cancer. There's not an option not to go in there. Masking in that setting really does remain very important.
Monkeypox cases in the U.S. way down. What have we learned about that virus in recent weeks and the way it's transmitted?
So it continues to be primarily transmitted through intimate or sexual contact. That's been very clear. And so we now are really encouraging any doctors who take care of sexually transmitted infections, any STI clinics, to routinely be offering routinely offering monkeypox vaccines, to be testing and screening for it. I think monkeypox also is going to be endemic. I don't think it's going anywhere. And so it's especially important, given that it continued to spread predominantly in the communities of gay, bisexual, and other same-gender loving men, that we want all those folks to get their monkeypox vaccines as well.
Earlier this month, your office also reported the lowest number of new HIV diagnoses in Chicago since 1987 at 627 new diagnoses. To what do you attribute that?
We are so thrilled by that. So, we've been doing a lot of work with community partners to better think about all the needs that somebody living with HIV has. So it used to be we would fund this organization to provide medications and this one to help with housing, and we might figure out, what mental health supports you need over here. Over the last few years, we've brought all of this together into what are called health homes, and of the Chicagoans, and there are thousands and thousands of them successfully living with HIV, taking their medications. If people consistently take their medications for HIV becomes almost impossible to spread. And so whereas, across the whole country, only a little more than half of people living with HIV are consistently taking their meds in what's called virally suppressed, people attached to our health homes in Chicago, more than 90% of them are virally suppressed. And when someone is virally suppressed, they're not going to get significantly sick, but more importantly, they're unable to spread HIV. And so there's a lot of pieces to this, but it has been a lot of work from just hundreds and hundreds of partners, and we're going towards zero. The goal is getting to zero by 2030 if we can.
Okay, a few more years. We've got 30 seconds, Dr. Arwady. Last time you were in the studio was March 2020. No mask, no social distancing. I think you were about maybe 2-3 months on the job at the time.
Yep.
Very briefly, how do you look back on these last 2.5 years?
So, my goodness, I think it has been such a disruptive time for everybody in every way, shape, or form. But also, when I look at it from the perspective of Chicago, I am so proud of how this city has responded. We have, for the most part, thought about how do we work together to have the common enemy be COVID and not each other. We've really improved our ability, I think, to take care of each other, think about some of those other resources. So I really am very appreciative of the Chicagoans who have gotten us this far. And if people are feeling happy that we're at a good point now, the way you can thank me is by getting your COVID-19 booster, because we want those memories from 2020 to stay memories.
2020. That is where we'll have to leave it. Dr. Allison Arwady, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And now to Paris for details on a question you might see on your ballot this election season. Paris.
Brandis, it's rare when newspaper editorial boards and fiscal watchdog groups recommend that residents vote to increase their property taxes. But that's exactly the case as Cook County voters face a binding question on their election ballot. Do you want to pay a little more to help fund the Cook County forest preserves? Outside groups have waged a public campaign to convince voters to say yes because they believe the investment will pay growing dividends.
The 3,500-acre Bussey Woods Forest Preserve is known for its trails, lagoons, and ancient forests. But a cluster of invasive buckthorn threatens the area's ecology.
Basically, it's a weed that chokes out all the native plants, it doesn't allow sunlight to get to the floor of the forest.
Cook County Forest Preserve District Superintendent Arnold Randall wants to remove the plant and restore the forest, like it did on the other side of this trail.
So you can see this is much clearer. You can actually see into the forest. You're not looking into a thicket of green.
But he says the forest preserves need more money for this and nearly 20,000 acres that are in line for a clearing.
There's a lot of things that we want to do, there are plans to do that we really wouldn't be able to do without additional resources.
The forest preserves are a quasi-separate unit of Cook County government that manages 70,000 acres of public land, along with the Brookfield Zoo and Chicago Botanic Garden. It does not have its own taxing authority and must go directly to voters instead. For the first time in nearly a century, Cook County commissioners voted to put a binding referendum on November's ballot. It asked voters in a roundabout way whether they would support hiking the Forest Preserve levy a fraction of a percent to bring in $40 million in new annual revenue.
Proponents say that amounts to about $20 annually on a house worth $300,000.
As a born and raised Illinoisan, I get it. I know what's cool and what's the Packers. I also know how important the forest preserves are to Cook County, and I know that we get to enjoy them because they were preserved for us.
Illinois-born actor Nick Offerman cut an ad for an independent expenditure group called Vote Yes for Clean Air, Clean Water, and Wildlife, aimed at getting the public on board.
And it just frankly, if you compare to other conservation districts in the state and other forest preserves in the state, it's underfunded and understaffed per acre pretty dramatically.
The campaign touts the forest preserve's role in absorbing floodwater and improving air quality. It has won the endorsement of the Chicago Tribune editorial board and the Civic Federation, which is a nonpartisan fiscal watchdog group. Civic Federation President Lawrence Massall, no fan of higher taxes, says this hike makes sense.
There's a plan. This money isn't going to be just thrown into the system.
Massall says $10 million of the $40 million is earmarked to shore up the district's pension system, which at nearly 60% funding makes it one of the healthiest of all the local government pensions. He says the district under board president Tony Preckwinkle and Superintendent Randall has cleaned up its act,
both in terms of their financial management, in terms of their operations, and what they've been able to do to bring camping and other activities. And we really saw during COVID how much the forest preserves were a benefit for people who could get out and use them.
The remaining $30 million is pegged for restoration, conservation programs, and the acquisition of thousands of new acres, so Cook County residents can escape to nature outside their front door for decades to come.
Obviously, if you go out west to the national parks, that's different, but here in an urbanized area, to have this so accessible is what makes it unique and different and special.
And Randall says the forest preserves make up about 11% of all the land in Cook County, making it the largest urban preserve of its kind in the country. And up next, we sit down with a local genius, so please stay with us.
Do you think there's been sort of a rethinking of how those events happened here in Chicago?
I made a promise to myself in my career that every year I would make a piece of art dedicated to the memory.
Got into a zone of mentor to children. See what we can do to kind of elevate each other. We all we got at this point.
I'm using my past to push forward, to build a movement to create the world that we all want to see.
Mass incarceration and all of its tentacles are the subject of research for recently named Genius. Genius is, of course, the nickname given to the MacArthur Foundation's annual fellowship awardees, which recognizes extraordinary dedication and originality in creative people in disciplines ranging from art and architecture to chemistry and physics and everything in between. One such fellow, named just last week, is Reuben Jonathan Miller, a sociologist, criminologist, and social worker whose work studies the long-term impacts of incarceration on individuals and their families. And of course, joining us now is Reuben Jonathan Miller, assistant professor in the University of Chicago School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. Reuben, it's good to see you again.
It's great to see you.
Thank you. We've spoken a lot, so I'm excited for you and glad we're here to talk about this. What was your reaction to hearing the news that you'd received the fellowship?
I screamed. I screamed. It was an ongoing, at least 60-second, just, oh!
60-second scream. What's it been like since then? Lots of phone calls?
Lots of phone calls, lots of congratulatory emails, lots of folks reaching out. I'm very grateful, very grateful.
What does this fellowship mean for the work that you do? I
appreciate the spotlight on people who we've learned to throw away. I mean, as you know, I follow people who get released from American jails and prisons. Most of the folks who I spend time with have committed some sort of crime, and those crimes range from small crimes to really hard to live with crimes, murder, rape, etc. And but everyone needs a place in the world, and so I feel like the fellowship is allowing us to think more carefully and critically about their lives, about their needs, about who they are, their families, and I'm grateful.
So in your book, Halfway Home, Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration, you write about something that we ourselves tried to explore in our Permanent Punishment series that aired a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, your expertise was central to our coverage of that, so we thank you. But you write about, the everlasting impact of the carceral system outside of prison walls. What are some of the ways that system impacts people long after prison?
Well, as you know, I mean, there's so many laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that follow people with criminal records that target them. So in the country, there are 44,000. In our state, there are over 1,300. And in our state, there are close to 900 labor market restrictions. So what that looked like up until about 2016, I'm talking about one specific law that looked like before 2016, before a congressional act, you couldn't have been trained as a barber inside an American jail or prison and come out and cut hair, for example. It looked like in the case of Marlon Chamberlain, who couldn't be the executor of his father's will, for example. It looked like the good character clauses that prevent people from getting licenses of all types. It looks like people who can't get houses or places to live, who can't rent apartments, who can't sit on boards of nonprofit organizations. In some states, who can't vote. I mean, and so every manner of civic participation is marred by the criminal justice system in ways that have been rendered invisible to most people because it's done through law and policy.
Do we overuse the criminal legal system to solve societal problems?
Without question. And I think everyone across the political spectrum admits this. They say something like, we're expecting our police to do too much. That's absolutely the case. Or they might say something like, our judges shouldn't be social workers or something like that. That's absolutely the case. These are very different things. A judge shouldn't be presiding over, for example, what happens with a family. But a judge does, because when you arrest a woman, and we know that most women have children, that judge is presiding over what happens in that family.
We've talked about this before, that it's not strictly a racial issue, though to be clear, black and brown communities are disproportionately impacted, but white communities are also impacted by our criminal legal system.
Absolutely. I mean, we've known this for quite a while. I mean, 38% of the prison population in the United States is black, somewhere between 35 and 38%. It depends on the year that you look. 35 to 38% of that prison population is white. If we released every black person, there's a political scientist, Marie Gottschalk, who I would like to give a shout out to, who does wonderful work. She writes, if you release every black prisoner today, you still have one of the largest prisons in the world. But one way that American racism works is it makes us think that crime is a black thing. And this is because of the fusion of blackness with criminality. And so we don't pay attention when in 2016 there's a report from Brame and colleagues that tells us that, for example, while just about half of all black men will be arrested before they turn 23, which is awful, 38% of white men will be arrested before they turn the age of 23 years old in our country. We overlook this altogether.
You've had your own experiences with family members who've been incarcerated, including your brother, who was incarcerated while you were researching this book. A couple of questions there. How does your own personal experience influence the work that you do, but also, what does that say or reflect about our use of the criminal legal system?
Well, 1 in 2 Americans has a family member who's been arrested or incarcerated. 1 in 2 Americans. So most of us, I would say, almost most of us, at least half of us have a loved one who's been in jail or prison, and half of us, meaning half of Americans, and that fact is exacerbated among black people. I mean, so something like 1 in 2 black women has a loved one who's currently in an American jail or prison. 1 in 8 white women does too. This closeness, though, this closeness that we fail to recognize, or that we refuse to recognize, the idea that someone in my family, like someone, I'm presuming yours, you don't have to admit that, like someone in yours or someone in every other person who I might bump into has a loved one who's been touched by this. It's something that we don't recognize because there's shame associated with crime and punishment in the United States. And so the shame of, say, having done something to land yourself in an American jail or prison is what prevents us from recognizing the impact of American jails and prisons on, for example, families in this country, especially black families. I mean, we talked about how big the system is. I mean, 19 million people have felony records. This represents something like 1 in 3 currently living black Americans. 1 in 3. That's giant, massive. Massive.
That's a lot. 1 in 3 is a third of black Americans, obviously. I'm not that good at math. Before we let you go,
I don't believe you.
Before we let you go, now, I know that you're on sabbatical from the University of Chicago. You're working on another project. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I'm very interested in what I'm calling the moral worlds of people who have been deemed violent. And I'm curious about the ways that they're treated as they bounce against different kinds of institutions. So how do we understand violence? How do we deploy violence when we recognize someone as violent? And what does the label violent do? How is the world shaped by and through it? For example, when we think about something like education, what role do ideas about delinquents play in the way that we make schools? And what role does the threat of violent crime play in the way we think about, for example, gated communities or something like that? That's one half of the project. And the other half is a longer study of the ways that countries recover from slavery. So I'm curious about what you do when this giant slave economy ends. I'd like to know what happens not just in the U.S. but in other places, France, Britain, et cetera. How do they set up institutions to gather up, to care for, to capture, to control, maybe in some ways, people that they deem violent in this case?
Of course, the grant comes with $800,000. Okay. First, can I borrow a few bucks? And
of course,
second,
I got you.
And second, is that grant, do you expect it will go towards the work you're currently on or to the next project after that?
I'm buying lottery tickets. I'm on a roll. I'm on a roll.
That's a genius move, obviously.
But certainly, my work has been a bit non-traditional. It's been, in some cases, a little bit difficult to fund. And so this kind of grant, this level of recognition will certainly help for me to carry on the kinds of things I've been trying to do.
All right. We look forward to seeing what happens next. Reuben Jonathan Miller, thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And visit our website to watch our 4-part permanent punishment series. And while you're there, check out our conversation with another MacArthur Fellow, visual artist Amanda Williams. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, Mayor Lightfoot hasn't used the $2 billion of federal relief funds earmarked for pandemic recovery. A look at where the money is and isn't going. Breast cancer is one of the most treatable types of cancer when detected early. Despite that, it's the leading cause of cancer deaths among black women. We explore why. The latest from the Joffrey Ballet, plus arts critic Hedy Weiss reviews Swing State, the new show at the Goodman Theater. And celebrates spooky season with a trip into the depths of the Catacombs Haunted House, where a dedicated Scream team has terrified visitors for more than 40 years. But for some more of today's top stories, R. Kelly's former business manager is asking a federal judge to award him $850,000 to cover attorney fees. In a trial that took place at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse, Darrell McDavid was acquitted on charges that he helped rig the R&B singer's 2008 child pornography trial. He filed a motion through his attorneys seeking a court order following what his attorneys called a, quote, vexatious, frivolous, and bad faith prosecution of their client. R. Kelly was convicted on multiple child pornography-related charges. A clerk at a neighborhood food and liquor store in West Ridge was fatally shot during an attempted robbery Monday evening, according to police. 66-year-old Salim Kamo was killed after he was shot once in the chest inside a store. He was taken to St. Francis Hospital in critical condition, and he later died of his injuries. Police say detectives are investigating and no one is currently in custody. An international team of astronomers, including some from Northwestern University, have detected the brightest gamma-ray burst ever recorded. The powerful explosion occurred approximately 2.4 billion light years away from Earth. Researchers hypothesized that the record-breaking burst was caused by a massive star collapsing and giving birth to a black hole. However, more analysis is still needed to confirm its cause. Mayor Lori Lightfoot has yet to make good on promises to use nearly $2 billion in federal relief funds to strengthen the city's tattered social safety net and to provide direct aid to residents struggling from the pandemic. Questions about the slow progress of the Chicago Recovery Plan have dominated budget hearings at City Hall and could be a major issue in the looming race for Chicago's mayor. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with a deep dive into the mayor's promise to help Chicagoans recover from the pandemic. So Heather, the mayor has gotten some pointed hearings, or some of her department heads have gotten some pointed questions in the hearings about the budget that are going on right now. What kind of answers are they getting?
Well, there are really two reasons that it's taken so long to spend this money. One is red tape. The cities have to request proposals from groups to do this work. They have to review those proposals. They have to approve those proposals, and then they can cut the check. But it was also a deliberate plan not to try to spend all of this money in 1 year for fear that it would overwhelm these relatively small nonprofit groups that will do the bulk of this work.
Also, you don't know what's going to happen in years to come, whether there's a recession and the city budget is really strapped, so perhaps they want a rainy day fund. What programs has the Chicago Recovery Plan funded so far? Well,
the biggest chunk of money has gone to fund the Guaranteed Income Pilot program that we've covered extensively. That is about $33 million, including administrative costs, that is out the door and is helping people. That is pretty much the biggest chunk of funds that have gone out the door so far this year.
And I know from progressive older people, homelessness and housing for the homeless is a big issue, is something they want more funding for. Let's listen to what Mayor Lightfoot said in October 6 on her budget address on this topic.
The 2023 budget includes over $200 million in investments for homelessness prevention, which will fund increased shelter capacity and rapid rehousing. The investments that we've made in affordable housing and in homelessness prevention, coupled with our targeted financial assistance program, are necessary steps toward ending the generational poverty that too many of our families struggle through. When these families have the tools that they need to thrive, our entire city thrives.
And the speech was October 3rd, the budget address. So break down that $200 million for us.
Well, nearly $100 million of that has carried over from 2022 to 2023. So a lot of progressive older people feel like the mayor is essentially double counting, giving herself extra credit for this spending. And the bulk of the money that the city has gotten from the federal government has gone directly into the city's coffers themselves to prevent massive budget shortfalls. And that's also why the city seems to have so much extra cash on hand, because all of the revenue problems that were caused by the pandemic, that's really been solved by that federal money, amounting to almost $1.3 billion that has prevented departments from having to go into the red.
But still, lots of older people wanting this money for direct aid. And Heather, the mayor has been saying over and over that Chicago is enjoying the best recovery of any big city from COVID. Do you think this becomes a campaign issue from those perhaps running to her left, saying, hey, you have this big federal pot of money, why aren't you spending it on programs to help people?
Well, it has been an issue since the first federal relief funds started to flow back in June of 2020. Progressive groups have always wanted the mayor to spend this money directly on services to help people, whereas the mayor has used a significant portion of this to basically make the city whole, including to help the Chicago Police Department at a time when there's lots of questions about accountability in the police department. That will certainly be an issue in the election to come.
And then you've got that supplemental pension payment.
That's right. That's $242 million essentially off the top. That's not going to result in a single person being housed or helped, and that might be a little bit of a tough pill to swallow in this election year, because everybody wants to campaign on being able to help people.
So candidates perhaps honing their messages right now as this campaign swings into full gear. Heather Sharon, thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read more of Heather's story on our website, WTTW.com/news. And up next, disparities in breast cancer detection and treatment. That's in a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices with Angel Ito. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Breast cancer is one of the most treatable types of cancer when detected early. And despite that, it's the leading cause of cancer deaths among Black women. According to the American Cancer Society, Black women are 41% more likely to die from breast cancer compared to white women. They are also less likely to be diagnosed and less likely to receive treatment. Joining us now to share more about those disparities during Breast Cancer Awareness Month are Annie Jones, president of the Sisters Network Chicago chapter, Tina Francois Blue, principal consultant at Francois Blue Consulting, and Dr. June McCoy, professor of medicine at Northwestern University's School of Medicine. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Annie, let's start with you. It's my understanding that you have beat breast cancer twice in the past 23 years. Knowing what you do now, can you share why you believe early detection is the best prevention?
Yes. I was diagnosed in 1999, the first time, and the tumor was small. And I had a lumpectomy done. And 15 years after that diagnosis, I was diagnosed again in the same breast. And because it had come back in the same breast, I opted to have a mastectomy. I didn't want to take any chances, and I was afraid that maybe if it came back in that breast that it may travel somewhere else. So having my mammograms yearly gave me the benefit of catching the tumor early enough that it could be treated with chemotherapy the second time, no radiation because it was the same breast. And it was because of that I feel that, I'm here today.
Wow. Now, Tina, this kind of brings me to my next question with you. You say that the cost of preventative measures means that we're asking women to essentially pay for their own lives. What do you mean by that?
I mean that for Black women, the standards of care in terms of how and when women are being recommended to go, that has changed over the last little while. So for a very long time, it was, at 40, you go and you begin to get your mammogram. And particularly for Black women, that's very important. And then shortly, the recommendations to change those guidelines to potentially 45 or even 50, that took all of that work and put it on its head, because women who weren't really wanting to go in the first place were now, it gave them a reason for them to delay care because their doctors were not advising them. And particularly for young Black women, that has been dire because there are some young Black women who have found their, because they're not being recommended to go, obviously they're not 40, they're in their 20s, some of them are in their 30s, some of them, in their early 40s. When they're finding things, their doctors are not advising them to go through the standard process. They're not advising them to go and get mammograms. They're advising them, just wait and see. Well, if it's an aggressive form, that aggressive form could have metastasized by the time they would, then be of age to then go the typical route. So some of the women that I've met have paid for their own mammograms, which has caught their cancers, and that is how they've been able to be here today.
Dr. McCoy, just jumping to you, thinking more about mammograms, I know that there is a myth, right, a stigma that mammograms can cause breast cancer.
No, that is somewhat of an urban myth. I think it came out of true concerns about the additive over time effect of radiation to the breast. So it was not something that I think people came up with, just willy-nilly. It was with some thought, but the studies have not borne that out. Mammography remains important, and we want women to have that. And I'm going to go with what Ms. Francois Blue and what Ms. Jones said earlier. Awareness and early detection is important, and I think if we can't dispel this myth that mammography will lead to breast cancer, then we're going to lose more of our own women to breast cancer. And as certainly they're both alluded to, we can get recurrent breast cancer more often among us, much more aggressive, so-called triple negative breast cancer in Black women like us. And so early detection, being individualistic in how we as doctors approach women, especially Black women, who might be finding lesions early, and making sure they get to mammography.
So we've talked about early detection, but now let's get into support. Annie, I know that you are the president of the Sisters Network Chicago chapter. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you all do to ensure that your members are feeling supported, whether that be emotional support or maybe even financial support, if that's an option as well?
We focus on 4 or 5 different things. We give support. Support meaning that shoulder to cry on, that warm hand to hold. We do outreach. Okay. We go into the community. We meet the women and men where they are. We take information out into the community so that the women can be educated. They can't always go to different facilities to get the information. They don't always look at TV. So we go to those neighborhoods and pass out breast health information. Advocacy. When the patient arises, we are available to go to Springfield or Washington, D.C. to advocate for bills that will be beneficial to women diagnosed with breast cancer and breast cancer survivors. And also, we are able to offer financial assistance to women diagnosed with breast cancer that may need mammograms, they may need support with their utility bills.
Now, Tina, I want to jump back to you because I know that you do a lot of consulting work with breast cancer organizations. So Annie just talked about different ways that they do support women, but what additional support do you believe that these women or these organizations need that they're not getting?
Well, I think importantly, particularly for organizations like Annie, it's a pleasure to know them and to see them work in a way. So if you think about the cancer community as a whole, everyone has a role that they're playing in providing services and getting women to care. But the grassroots organizations particularly, I don't think that they're getting the full appreciation from the philanthropic community to understand the very unique role that they play in connection with other academic institutions, other medical institutions. There is an appreciation for the way in which grassroots organizations like Sisters Network, like Sisters Working It Out, how they're able to connect with women in a very real and personal way. But in terms of how that translates with grant dollars, how that translates to other types of relationships that have a much more broader impact that can allow a Sisters Network, a Sisters Working It Out, to be able to then multiply how many women they're able to reach, those things don't happen as quickly as they do for many others. And I think that is a missed opportunity. And if we're looking to advance equity, let's advance economic equity for these Black-led organizations that are out here, the women who are at risk, who are working on behalf of their sisters and their aunts and their daughters and their mothers, help them to be able to give them the resources to make sure that their infrastructure is solid so that they're able to grow sustainably.
Dr. McCoy, I want to end it with you. If you could share any tidbits to prevent this from even happening to us. Are there any tidbits that you would like to share, or would you say that that's also a myth on how you live your life and lifestyle choices?
Lifestyle choices certainly are quite important. Diet is important. A low-fat diet, and I'm not saying eat food that you don't really like, but kind of cut back on the fat, exercising. So you're healthy and ready to fight the disease if it comes your way, and really staying connected with your doctor. I know the time is almost running short, but there is inequity and many people don't have access to physicians. But try your best to reach out to grassroots associations like the ones that are being run by these wonderful women here, and trying to find a way to get your mammogram, to get your breast examination, and to get sent on or referred if you need to have some procedure done because an abnormal finding is noted on your mammography.
That was beautifully said. Our thanks to Annie Jones, Tina Francois Blue, and Dr. June McCoy. Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
The fall theater and dance season is in full swing, and it's been a while since we've had our next guest in studio. January 2020, in fact. A lot of stuff happened in between that time. Hedy Weiss, so good to have you here in person.
And not have a studio.
In this new studio, not have a screen between us as we talk about these wonderful productions. So let's start with the Joffrey Ballet, Beyond Borders. It's sort of a hodgepodge of different productions.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Well, I wouldn't call it a hodgepodge. Like everything else, it's kind of a revival. And I love this quote from the founder of the Joffrey. It says, "Classical ballet is our core, but it is not our circumference." And that's really what this program was. It was a combination of contemporary versions of ballet and then classical, but also with a little bit of a modern touch. And we're seeing the dancers rehearse. They didn't get footage from the actual performance, but what's amazing is, you know, dancers have to be in class every day, and during the pandemic that was not easy, and they are so flawless. And they now have the Lyric Opera Orchestra as their backup orchestra, which is a great thing.
They're at the Lyric now in the Civic Opera House.
In the Civic Opera House, and they have a wonderful conductor, as they've always had.
And you were saying that Joffrey hasn't missed a beat at all. You were worried about that.
And they did a lot of Zooming during the pandemic, and they really kept that professional, incredible technique alive. And the three ballets here are wonderful. There is one by a British choreographer, one by a contemporary Chicago visitors choreographer, and then there's one by Gerald Arpino, who is the co-founder of the company, who brought the company to Chicago. And he's no longer with us, but his ballets are beautiful. And so that was the final ballet of the trio, and you know, it was that beautiful mix of modern but also fabulous technique, ballet technique.
Quite a range of performances, and as I understand, it's only on stage through Sunday?
Yes, it's for 2 weeks, and you know, I've noticed that a lot of runs are shorter these days because they want to fill the seats.
Absolutely, that's a big room to fill.
It's a big room to fill, and they filled it.
And all right, so next we have the highly anticipated Swing State, a world premiere at the Goodman Theater, takes place in contemporary Wisconsin. Set the stage for this one.
All right, well, it's set in a prairie town with a woman who was recently widowed and is absolutely devastated and very depressed. And she kind of is the caretaker for a neighboring boy who just got out of prison. And we see in this clip an interesting thing, because what turns the play around is that he has found a trunk that she has not touched for a long time in the garage, and that's not a good thing.
Don't start yelling, okay? But Chris did have one point, which is somebody knew what was in that trunk and walked straight to it without taking anything else from the barn.
So you do think it was me?
I asked you not to yell, please. Just listen, okay?
And from your review, I read that depression is a really strong theme here. How are the performances?
The actors are wonderful. Mary Beth Fisher, who we just saw, with Bubba Weiler, who is a young actor I was not familiar with, who has a great performance. And it is, you know, it's about really the depression. It was written during the pandemic, and I think it really captured that sense of isolation and also some issues of, like, you know, biological changes and all of that. So it was, and she's very obsessed with the environment and the natural world. So it was a very interesting play, and it's also about who you lock up in prison and how that works.
And so a lot of societal issues here.
A lot
wrapped
of
up
societal
into
issues.
And as I understand, it's one of Robert Falls' last plays, because he's the longtime artistic director of Goodman,
Right.
and he's retiring after this year.
Technically, his tenure since 1986 is over at the end of this year, and then Susan Booth takes over. But he's going his finale is The Cherry Orchard by Chekhov, which will be in April.
Of course, he has to do a classic for the finale.
Right.
All right, finally, you attended the Joseph Jefferson Awards, the Chicago version of the Tonys. First time in person since 2019. What stood out?
And that was a real rebirth celebration because it was
everyone was
everyone
thrilled to be
was
there.
They were all so happy to be there. The winning musical is Kinky Boots. That was a big hit at Paramount Theater. Unfortunately, I did not see it, but I know Paramount is just on such a high level. And then the play was Goodnight Oscar, which is going to Broadway with Sean Hayes, who was actually there last night.
Chicago native.
A Chicago native, really musically brilliant, and will have, for the 20 weeks that he's on Broadway, he's going to have to play Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue every single night for 20 weeks. That's quite a task. And he's a brilliant pianist as well as an actor.
Multi-talented guy, funny, good dramatic actor and musician. All right, Hedy Weiss, a lot of exciting things going on, and it's exciting to have you back here, too.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
All right. And up next, a terrifying tour of one of Chicago's longest-running haunted houses.
Once upon a time, it seemed like every Catholic church in Chicago ran a haunted house fundraiser for Halloween. Over the years, though, most of them have, well, died off, one by one. Not so at one Northwest Side parish where a dedicated scream team has kept the scares coming for more than 4 decades. And after a pandemic hiatus, they're back with a vengeance to scare the devil out of you. Producer Erica Gunderson descends into the depths of the catacombs at St. Paschal.
Welcome back, survivors! You're coming down now. You are good to go. Welcome to the catacombs. Enjoy your stay.
It's been 2 long years since the undead last rose from the bowels of St. Paschal's Church. But reports of the demise of the catacombs haunted house have been, as they say, greatly exaggerated. The tunnel of gory scenes snaking through the Northwest Side Church basement is one of, if not the, longest-running haunted house experiences in Chicago. What began in 1979 with just a few classic horror characters in the boiler room has transmogrified into a 15-minute tour of terror run entirely by volunteers in support of the parish school. Scare master Kevin Marks started haunting the catacombs as a parent volunteer.
My son started preschool here. Here I am today. You know, my son now is 29, so it's a long time going by.
For much of that time, Marks spearheaded the event alongside longtime head haunter Jason Suski, who died suddenly in 2021.
He was the heart and soul of this place, and we miss him. We miss him a lot, you know. And we go on, you know, and we want to go on for him. I've been doing it long enough. Let the younger generation take over and keep the tradition alive.
Now, after a COVID pause, the catacombs are howling once again, and Marks is passing the leadership torch to a new gruesome twosome, David Gottstein and Alex O'Shaughnessy, who both started volunteering at the catacombs as teenagers.
What hooked me was just scaring other people. I think that was just the fun of it. Each night we always try to top ourselves.
This haunted house has run for over 40 years. Why do you think it has so much staying power?
The biggest thing is just our community, to being involved with church, the school, the neighboring businesses, because we know it's for a good cause, we know it's for the school, and we enjoy doing this.
Especially for like people that live in Portage Park, I've seen some of the same people every year for the past 10 years, you know, and it's a good feeling too that they come back and like it and like our product. This is kind of what I live for every year. Like every September to October, I tell people, do not contact me. I'm not available. This is my heart, my passion's into this.
But just because it's in a church basement, don't be lulled into thinking they're going to take it easy on you.
Who are my favorite people to scare, to be honest? I know it sounds cruel. Little kids. Little kids who get to the front door who realize when they see the smoke and they hear the music that they don't want to go.
You get scared here. A lot of people come, and I've seen it over the years. You know, these kids come down and they're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to get scared. And when they're coming out, they're like, you could see the fear in their eyes.
I can personally attest that they take their scaring seriously. The Catacombs team says all the blood, sweat, and tears they pour into the haunt will be worth it when their ears are once again graced by the sweet shrieks of terrified visitors.
When those doors finally open, there's customers, and it's like, finally, we're back. We did it. We got to this finish line. That's what I'm looking forward to this Friday, to seeing those crowds, seeing the scares, hearing the screams again, and yeah.
Hello! God, that was so scary!
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
I respect Erica for actually going through it. So if you're prepared to be scared, the Catacombs are open for the next 2 weekends. You'll find more about that on our website. And one final fun fact, most of those scary scenes in the Catacombs stay in place year-round, just lying in wait for next year's visitors. So think about that the next time you pass by St. Pascal's. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. You can also get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Candidates for Governor Darren Bailey and incumbent J.B. Pritzker are just about to wrap up their final debate right now. Our Spotlight Politics will weigh in with all the highlights.
And we head to the West Loop for some photos of some of Chicago's most communal moments featured in a new exhibit. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud of its partners named Illinois leading lawyers by the Law Bulletin Publishing Company of Chicago.